Hey everybody, the night of the Seder is a very complex time. It's such an educational opportunity, but it brings in us very mixed emotions. We're not sure what to think or how to feel. And sometimes we're supposed to feel opposite things at the same time. In this week's Kitah lesson, we studied about Matzah, and specifically about the paragraph called Ha Lachma Anya. Let me show you exactly what we did, and I'll explain to you about why it's called Lachma Anya. So the first thing the kids did was they had to figure out the translation of the phrase Ha Lachma Anya, the paragraph that we cited at the very beginning of the Seder. And so they had to figure out what words that they knew, what words that they didn't know, and then match them and to understand the entire paragraph. And ultimately, all the kids did it. It was really great. So one thing I wanted to focus on was that this idea of Lachma Anya. What is Lachma Anya? The bread of affliction. The words Lachma Anya teach us Lechem Oni, the bread of affliction. And what I showed the kids was that this wasn't a phrase that the rabbis figured out and made up on their own, but rather it's from the Torah itself. So we read this pasuk. The Torah tells us, Shiv'at yamim tochal alav matzot. For 7 days you should eat upon it the matzot. So Hashem calls matzah matzot. Lechem Oni. Hashem, the Torah says it's called Lechem Oni, the bread of Oni. What does Oni mean? So the dictionary says that Oni means either affliction or poverty. And we discussed, why would matzah be bread of poverty? Why would matzah be bread of affliction or suffering? So all of you parents, anyone who has bought matzah, especially hand matzah or shmura matzah, nowadays it's the bread of the rich. Okay, so it's not a bread of the poor. You got to be rich in order to afford it. But the Torah calls it Lechem Oni, bread of Oni, of suffering or affliction. And we talked about the idea of why would a poor person make very simple bread? Or why would someone who's suffering be fed very simple bread? And I even asked the students to think about the people who are captives in Gaza today. What kind of bread are they being fed? And that helped them to understand what would it mean to be called bread of affliction or bread of suffering. But then we took it a little bit deeper. I asked the children to translate a pasuk from Shemot, Parak Yud Bet, the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the Torah tells us that they baked. There we know something a little bit different about matzah. The matzah wasn't something that they ate when they were in Egypt, but when they were leaving Egypt, they baked the dough. Now, by the way, some children were able to translate on their own, and some had a link, so they were able to copy, but that's okay. Okay, they break the bread. Ugot matzot yilocham beitz. They break them as cakes of matzah. Why? Ki gorshumi Mitzrayim. They were ejected from Mitzrayim and they couldn't wait. V'gam tzeidah lo asu lahem. They also didn't mitzeidah. They didn't prepare provisions. And I asked the children to think about very carefully. 1 second. They didn't prepare provisions. Is that a positive or a negative? So some of them said really something interesting. It's positive because it shows how noble they are, how they put other things before themselves. Another child said it's positive because they trusted Hashem to bring provisions for them, which is exactly what Isaac had the answer of, exactly what Rashi said. And you all don't know who Isaac is, so that's okay. And another student said, where is it? Said, on the other hand, this tells the Jewish people didn't have faith that they would be freed from Egypt. It's negative that they didn't prepare provisions. So it's really interesting, this idea of they didn't prepare provisions. Why didn't the Jewish people prepare provisions for themselves if they knew that they were going to leave? Why did they have to all of a sudden make matzah for themselves? Those are two explanations. So let's go back to the two explanations. Said that the Gemara gives a third explanation. Why is it called Lechem Oni? The Gemara says, Amar Shmuel, Lechem Oni, from the word Ktiv, it says Lechem Oni. Lechem she'onim alav dvarim. Things we answer, we talk about the bread a lot. So this matzah, we call it, let's go back to where we call it Lachma Anya. Lachma Anya can mean, we call it the bread of affliction, or the bread of poverty. But Lachma Anya, Shmuel in the Gemara says, can mean the bread of discussion, something we talk about a lot, because there's so much to talk about. And as you think about your Seder, you should ask your children, what are you going to think about when you're eating the matzah? The first time you taste it, think about the suffering of the Jewish people. Think about the suffering of the people in Gaza. What is the bread that they're eating? Can they even eat matzah? But also think about, is it bread? What does it inspire in us? The faith of the Jewish people, the ambivalence they might have had. Sometimes matzah is much more than just a piece of bread. Okay, I hope this will enhance your Seder and you have something to discuss with your children, even on Shabbat and moving forward at the Seder itself. Make it a great day.